But you gotta maintain, you know? Yeah, so. This song is for the flower that blossoms in the rain.
The preface of Bell Hook's book, before we get started, it says the will to change men, masculinity, and love is about our need to live in a world where women and men can belong together. Looking at the reasons patriarchy has maintained its power over men in their lives, our urge is to reclaim feminism for men, showing why feminist thinking and practice are the only way we can truly address the crisis of masculinity today. In these chapters, I repeat many points so that each chapter alone will convey the most significant ideas of the whole. Men cannot change if there are no blueprints for change. Men cannot love if they are not taught the art of loving. It is not true that men are unwilling to change. It is true that many men are afraid to change. It is true that masses of men have not even begun to look at the ways that patriarchy keeps them from knowing themselves, from being in touch with their feelings, from loving. To know love, men must be able to let go the will to dominate. They must be able to choose life over death. They must be willing to change. And I've followed you for quite a while, and I've been an admirer of the work that you do, the content that you put out. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started, and how you started to make this type of content?
Honestly, my TikTok journey, I never sought out to be like a content creator. That wasn't something that I was trying to do or even looking into doing. I was really just sharing some of my thoughts and opinions, and some of my content ended up going viral. And I became part of a larger discussion that was already being had because my thoughts, my opinions, and my beliefs were consistent with that of a lot of other people's experience. And I was able to put to words things that people felt, people experienced, but they wasn't necessarily able to articulate, or maybe they didn't have the space to articulate it. So for me to be able to say these things and share some of these thoughts and validate a lot of experiences that people were having, I kind of felt the responsibility to keep that up and make sure that I was continuing to participate in these conversations.
Absolutely.
And not just for those around me. Having these conversations has benefited me individually because I've learned so much. I've been able to grow so much, and I've been able to. One thing about acquiring knowledge is like the more you get, the more you realize you don't really have. Your
Right.
perspective of the universe, it changes when you realize how vast the universe is, and you realize how what you thought you knew was really insignificant in the grand scheme of things.
That's very true. You know what to say? You think you know, but you have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Similar journey. Like when I got on TikTok, it was, I think, like many people, right around COVID. COVID
Absolutely.
started and the quarantines and whatnot. And really just trying to find a way to maintain sanity, right? And I had to come out with a book, and so I was sharing poetry from that book or whatnot. I came to this platform as a writer, and what I noticed was that some of my poetry had political content, and I would get pulled into these different discussions about race, and then later about gender. And what I noticed was that the very same men that were very vehement about racial equality would participate in
Right.
gender oppression,
Right.
using some of the same techniques and strategies. And so that's where my content turned left, so to speak, and I started speaking more about like gender equality more than anything else, because I was like, we got to get this. You know what I mean? How can you
Right.
practice something on one hand at the same time be trying to be saved from it or seek justice from it? So, but I think it's important to not only talk about what's wrong, and where people also what's right, and that's, I think, where we enter in with this discussion about the new masculine, right? How to, okay, we talk about toxic masculinity, but what's the alternative, right? What are some other things that men can do that's different, right? So wanted to lead into kind of the first question, like, how do you define healthy masculinity in contrast to toxic masculinity?
Okay, so before I get into that, I want to say something about the new masculine. I
Yeah.
think a lot of the ideas and a lot of the traditions that we're moving away from, we see as backwards. A lot of these things are outdated in the sense that it's not productive and it's not progressive. But there has always been a certain level of resistance to these ideas. There's always been people who challenge the norm, and these people would usually be shunned and blacklisted, or they would be denied a certain level of representation and a certain level of freedom of expression. So they oftentimes get erased from history. They oftentimes get dismissed, or their contributions to our progression as a society gets minimized. So a lot of the things that we feel like is new to us, I think it's really new to the global perspective and a social perspective, as to this is something that men not only can do and should do, but we have been doing.
I like that a lot. That's a very important point. Like, it's possible. It's been done before. It may not have been publicized. We didn't have social media to put things out their way. So I guess some of this conversation is, how do we make these things mainstream, and how do we, I guess, change the narrative of what's normal, what's acceptable, what's desirable, what's beneficial.
So I think, and this goes back to answering your question about toxic masculinity versus healthy masculinity. I think masculinity is going to be different from person to person, and how you perceive it, how you interact with it, and what it means to you individually. But as far as, to have a healthy relationship with your masculinity, it's important to recognize when your masculinity is imposing on someone else's freedom of expression, someone else's freedom to make a choice. And oftentimes our masculinity, it becomes toxic to us as individuals within ourselves, because it may impose on our ability to express things that we perceive as less than masculine. So a lot of feelings that we may have, we'll have to ignore them or push them down, bury them deep inside, because this doesn't feel masculine, and I don't want to express myself in any way that's less than manly. I don't want to be anything less than macho, because I see everything other than masculinity as in some way being inferior to masculinity. So now I've internalized a certain sense of self-hatred, because not every part of my being is going to be masculine. Not every part of my being is going to reflect what I identify as masculine, but that's still part of who I am. And for me to reject anything that I perceive as less than masculine, I'm rejecting part of myself.
No, I agree. I think that part of the problem is that we don't necessarily define masculinity at all. We just say what is not feminine and label that masculine. We say, okay, we want to get as far away from the feminine as possible. And I think wrapped in that is also a healthy dose of homophobia. And we want to get far away from, being perceived as homosexual and being perceived as a woman as possible, because in that is power, right? The more masculine you are, the more powerful that you're perceived, because we've made those two terms almost synonymous with each other. My masculinity is socially, not has been intrinsically tied to my ability to dominate someone else.
Right.
The more of a good dominator that I am, the more masculine I'm seen. So that could go from physical strength to cunning, to your sense of honor, to all those things, your sense of chivalry. All of those things are kind of tied together with your ability to go to war. With your ability to acquire large amounts of money, and in the way that becomes toxic is because our society is, well, one of the ways it becomes toxic is our society is not set up for every man even to win. You know what I mean? So there's only a few men that's going to get to this pinnacle, that is actual masculinity, being wealthy, being strong physically, being mentally dominant. And so everyone else is now left with this more so gaps in your masculinity. And we're trying to fill those gaps, and they often get filled with dangerous behaviors, right? So now it's my masculinity is based on how much I can drink. My masculinity is defined by how many women I can bed with, all of those type of things.
Right. And these external sources of masculinity, that it's really you're trying to manufacture some masculinity for yourself because you're trying to cover up this insecurity. I feel like as a man, it is my role to be a provider. So now I have to acquire more funds and more resources so that I can prove and validate that I am a provider when inherently I might be stingy with these resources. I might be stingy with the money that I acquire, but this is something that I'm using to validate my ability to be a provider and thus manufacture a certain level of masculinity for myself.
Right. And if I can't be a full-fledged provider, I can lean into the protection piece of it, or the illusion of protection, right? Because it's like, well, you're not necessarily protected, but you feel protected because I'm a violent person. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or and I have the capacity for violence. So it's better to be in here with me, even though I'm insufferable, than out there with these other men who are also violent but don't know you as much, right? And don't
Because when all else fails, if I'm more capable of violence than you are, then that means I'm able to convince you that I'm more capable of protecting you from violence.
right. Big facts. Um, so and I don't know. For me, like when I look at healthy masculinity, right, it's based on outcome, right? And it's based on environment and well-being. So, you know, the way I express my masculinity, is it going to create a favorable outcome for everyone involved? Is it going to create a better relationship with my family members, with my intimate partner, with my children? Is it going to create a actual safe space, right? Or is it going to deal in these illusions? Or is it going to create more dangerous situations? Um, so those are, I guess. But what are some of the things you think? Excuse me, 1 second.
So when it comes to being a protector, if you associate protection with masculinity, and that's something that you feel that you have to do, it is not only your responsibility to offer protection, but it's also your responsibility to not only offer protection, from physical threats, but mental and emotional threats, right? And if your protection is coming in the form of you controlling and you abusing those in which you are supposed to be protecting, you're not actually offering protection. You're exploiting and using people who you may be more capable of physical violence, or you may have the intellectual ability and the emotional willingness to manipulate and exploit other people's. So even if you're not, controlling people by force or using physical violence to control people, this willingness to manipulate and exploit others so that you can position yourself as a protector is not actually being a protector. But if you're actually going to be a protector, you don't have to convince those that you're protecting that you're actually protecting them. They're going to feel safe. They're going to feel protected. So your responsibility is not only to protect them, but it's to listen to them, it's to hear them, it's to receive information from them about what type of protection they may need. Because it's easy for me to protect you from something that I deem as a threat, but being two totally different people, you may not feel that it's a threat, or something that I may not recognize as a threat may be violent to you, or it may be a threat to you. And I could be the source of that threat.
No,
And if I'm unwilling to listen to you, I can't protect you.
that part, that part. How can you protect someone that you won't even listen to for
Right.
them to explain from their point of view what the danger is? And in listening to women, a lot of times women are gonna say, "Well, it's the entire environment, it's the mentality that's dangerous to me." So the first thing we have to do if we're gonna protect women is to protect them from us. Protect them, and not just physically, but from mentally, emotionally.
Right.
I think about the gangster films where they go around and they're like selling protection. You know what I mean? It's like, oh yeah, we're gonna sell protection. It's insurance policy.
It's
But really,
extortion
yeah, it's extortion. You're
all
you're
day
you're buying
long.
protection from them if you don't
Absolutely.
pay them. they're going to be the ones that burn down your shop. Now, not the
Right.
other.
Reward me for protecting you from this threat that I represent.
Yep, or that I
It's
contribute
extortion.
to. Because
Right,
a lot of
right.
times men will they'll say that they're protecting their woman, you know what I mean, from certain things, but also participate in the very culture that creates the danger when dealing with everyone else. You know what I mean? Absolutely.
And and
Um,
and and to go beyond that, if you are contributing to a culture that threatens other women while at home protecting your woman, you're not actually protecting your woman, because your contributions to this culture that puts other women at risk, when your woman is exposed to that culture, she's exposed to your contributions to that culture. So you're not protecting your woman. You're simply giving her this illusion of protection in your arms, and even then you're exposing her to more potential risk.
yeah. Asa says that part in many instances is protection from their partners on all levels. Yeah, absolutely. So, how does patriarchy shape male identity, and what reasons exist that would require men to change their thinking and behavior?
So when it comes to the patriarchy and how we interact with each other as a society, the way that we function as a community, a lot of times we see ourselves as we're born with this inherent role. We have a job, we have a responsibility to our community and our society that isn't necessarily productive. So when you see yourself as a man and you're supposed to be a leader because you're a man, what are you a leader of? Simply being a man doesn't make you a qualified leader. It doesn't qualify you or give you the right even to, determine whether or not other people should be able to do certain things and, express themselves in certain ways. So I think a lot of times when it comes to the patriarchy, we don't realize as men how it's not only dehumanizing to women and children and people who are not men, but it's dehumanizing to us as well, because now we have to conform to these specific roles that may not be consistent with who we really are, how we self-identify or how we feel and how we experience the life that we're living. And when you're conforming to something like patriarchal hierarchy, you have to accept that someone is higher than you. You have to accept that someone has more value in this system than you. And that's even more dehumanizing to the individual, because I can't tell a woman that as a man, I'm her leader without also acknowledging that I would have to yield to the leadership of a man who may have more financial resources or a man who may be more capable of violence.
No, that's facts. March Revolution says, I feel like oftentimes men change solely based on the access or lack thereof to women. Um, and I think that's true. You know what I mean? I think a lot of times men channel their be you only change when you're up against a wall. A lot, unfortunately. I've always thought that wisdom is not just learning from your personal experiences, but being able to learn from the experiences of others. But unfortunately, when it comes to this topic, a lot of men only change once they hit the wall. Like they only change maybe once they have daughters and they see all the different things that they've done to other women now being put on the people that they love as they grow
Right.
up. And it's like then they become very overprotective of those daughters, but not necessarily still changing their outlook on society. um I think
And
you bring up
that in my opinion, I don't think that's when we're necessarily have our backs against the wall. I think that's when we come to a fork in the road and we're left with two options. Either we're going to change our ways and our beliefs, or we're going to continue in our ways and our beliefs while being hypocrites and trying to somehow convince ourselves that our daughter is special. Our daughter is different because she has a father, because she has proximity to a man that cares about her. She shouldn't be vulnerable to the attacks and the threats that men represent. So we have to somehow convince ourselves that the women around us are different and the women around us deserve better treatment than that in which we give women outside of our family or outside of our close circles. So it's at that fork in the road, your integrity becomes challenged at that point. Now you have to ask yourself, am I going to continue being the same POS that I was before, or am I going to change my ways and be the type of man to strange women that I would want strange men to be to the women in my family?
Yeah, but I agree. But it's real interesting because we see that realization with our daughters, but not necessarily with our mothers. And I think that's because at least for some men, on some level, the role of mother is not necessarily like we don't see our mothers as full human beings. Like you imagine your mother having like relations with anybody maybe even other than your father. It's like, well, wait a minute, whoa, you're not supposed to be doing that. You're my
Right.
mom. You know what I mean? So there's something there when we talk about because you would think because you have a mother and you love your mother that you will automatically have that type of empathy where it's like, wait a minute, I don't want a man treating my mother like that, so I'm not going to treat another woman like that. So is it that we don't see our mothers as women, or is I don't know what that disconnect is. But what I
I
mean
think
when go ahead.
I think when it comes to women in general, a lot of times we feel entitled. We feel entitled to women's bodies. We feel entitled to women's labor. And when it comes to mom, like she's not human. That's mama. That's a different type of person. And we you're right in the sense that we don't see her as human. We don't see her as a complete person. We see her as the role or the responsibility that she has to us. We see her as our nurturers. And oftentimes we look for our moms to enable us in the ways that we aren't necessarily productive with other people in society. So a
That
lot of the issues in how we interact with women begin with how we interact with our mothers.
that's right. And because you see, and this is where you get into patriarchal women, because sometimes even if you're in a single mother home, that can still be a patriarchal home where it's still very
Absolutely.
much either maybe Jesus is the man of the house, or kind of the imaginary man. You know what I
Or
mean?
the
Whether
oldest son.
yeah, the oldest son could be that. So it's that that way of thinking, but when I say when you have your back up against the wall as a man, it means you're not only just looking at a fork in the road where you have to make a decision, but you're now losing relationships based on your prior behavior. A lot of times this happens when you're like 40, 50, when you become not just a father, but when you start looking at, okay, what about my grandkids? What about the relationship I'm going to have with my daughters? Because once you've kind of raised them, and now they're like, I have a choice of whether I'm going to F with you or not. It's like, oh, wait a minute. Now you start getting the consequences of that thinking. Whenever that is, when the consequences of your thinking start to bear out, whether that's losing your marriage, you know what I mean, losing your home, whether that's family familiar strain where now certain members of your family don't mess with you because you're not you're not necessarily good to be around. Sometimes men soften in their older age, and you would think that as you see that happen, you would be able to learn from the experiences of others. Like, wait a minute, I don't want to be that man at 40 and 50 years old, isolated, you know what I mean, in a nursing home, you know what I mean, with bad health. So let me maybe change some things up now as a 20-year-old man. But a lot of times we don't see that. We just kind of remain in that same cycle.
I think a lot of that comes from a certain level of self hatred that we as men carry with ourselves for so long, because a lot of times we're not necessarily given a space to express ourselves emotionally or in certain ways that are seen as less than masculine, and that stuff impacts us. It has a huge effect on us, and the longer that we go while doing these things, the deeper and the more impactful it becomes. But as men, we're not giving ourselves the space to express ourselves. We're not giving ourselves companionship amongst each other. We're not establishing any bonds with men or women. So when we're older and lonelier, we're not able to share our experiences with other people because even if we have people around us, we're not even comfortable enough to say that, hey, I failed. I dropped the ball.
No, and being able to admit failure, and this is something that I wish they taught in school, that because they don't necessarily teach it in school at all. But being able to admit failure is part of your pathway to success. We
Yeah.
make it so um, difficult to admit failure because of fear of embarrassment, because people will never let it down, because that becomes a permanent part of your reputation. That we really
We
stifle
think
learning.
this is a fear that we carry. We carry
Yeah,
if we admit that we failed, you see it, I see it, we both acknowledged it, and we're afraid that this acknowledgement of failure is now going to define me, as opposed to how I respond to the failure.
yeah. Empress says it's that ego, and I would tend to say that that's right, and I think in
It's
part that's
it's it's
because
really a shield. It's
yeah,
really a shield that we use for our insecurities. We use ego and pride as this like mask or this shield for our genuine insecurities, but it's not genuine. It's not genuine pride. You're not taking pride in anything. You don't have anything to genuinely be egotistical about. You didn't accomplish anything. You failed. You're afraid of admitting failure because you're insecure. And now you have to manufacture some type of pride and ego to cover up that insecurity.
and like all lies, the more lies you tell, the more lies you have to tell.
You have to continue building this imaginary universe.
That's big facts. I think a lot of it comes down to the way you talked about gender roles earlier, and being kind of like handed this uniform, almost at birth. Like, okay, you're a boy. That means you gotta be a fighter. You gotta be charismatic. You gotta be persuasive. Um,
Emotionally stiff.
yeah, yeah. Tell me a little bit about like especially the emotional stuff, like the stoicism. Like, what are your thoughts on stoicism and not even classic stoicism, but like the way it's been popularized today?
I think a lot of somehow we've been convinced that there's this contrast between logic and emotion. And we
Mm,
often compare the two as if they exist in opposition to one another. So whenever we see emotion, whenever we feel emotion, we oftentimes associate it with being feminine. And for us to validate ourselves as men, to validate ourselves as masculine, we have to reject that in which we see as emotional, even though we oftentimes express anger without reservation. We oftentimes express discontent without reservation, but we're able to do these things because we can associate these things with, we can express these things with violence. We can express these things with actions that we perceive as masculine. So now we're able to feed into all of these negative actions, disregarding the fact that we are being very emotional and and somehow ignore the rest of our emotional being.
I agree. One way I define emotions are thoughts you can't put words to. So it's a lot of times the intuition that's working underneath in the subconscious realm, that's telling you that something's wrong or telling you that something needs to change, or it's that those things you sense yet but can't quite put into words. And once you put it into words, then you can put it into kind of a logical format. But that's a human characteristic. We all have emotions. We all have logic. Those are tools at our disposal in ways that
Absolutely.
we
That
uh,
coexist within us, and they
express.
should.
But on the one hand, you're saying, well, because you're a man, you have to cut yourself off from your emotions. And oh, well, because you're a woman, you have to cut yourself off from logic. It's both of those are social constructs. They're not biological at all.
Right. And these social constructs are constantly used as double standards for women because women are somehow, even though being emotional is seen as feminine, if a woman is emotional, she's still going to be somehow like bashed for it.
Right.
Like you're expressing too much emotion as a woman. You don't have enough self control. You need a man to control you. But when I, as a man, express an overwhelming amount of emotion, people are going to take that as whatever is triggering him must be serious, or there's something wrong with him as a man, because men should not be this emotional. That's a woman trait, but we don't even give women the space to do it.
That actually leads into my next question, talking about the difference between, I guess, boyhood and manhood. Because a lot of times, I hear the term "mama's boy," or when you see an emotional man, oh, he's not fully mature because he's too emotional. Like, besides the factor of age, like, what is the difference between a boy and a man?
So when it comes to like age, that's more of a measure of like your physical maturity, but you still have a mental and emotional maturity. You still have like a financial maturity, right? So you have to have certain levels of maturity. And when it comes to manhood, same thing with masculinity. It's going to differ from person to person, but the one of the important factors of manhood is the ability to be independent. If you're not able to take care of yourself, if you're not able to function as an independent individual in whatever aspect, then you have not yet fully reached the adulthood of that aspect of your life, because you're not capable of exercising agency over yourself and making those decisions for yourself. For in regards to like sex, for example, a lot of men don't have the sexual maturity to engage with a partner because you don't have the ability to recognize or respect when someone else is setting boundaries with you. And an inability to recognize and respect boundaries means that you aren't qualified to engage in this type of activity with someone else. Now, as a child, if you're alone, then it's just you, right? So whatever you're doing, worst case scenario, is only going to affect you. But once you go to the next level and you have to mature and evolve, and these actions impact those around you, you haven't reached adulthood until you have been able to function in these aspects of your life independently without disrupting or abusing someone else or exploiting someone else. A lot of times we as men, especially like when we start families, women have to take on the emotional labor of whatever situation may arise that we don't want to be emotionally involved in, because we may not have the emotional stamina or maturity to actually handle the situation. So we're pushing this labor off onto the women and exploiting the women in our lives because we see them as more emotional.
That's a great. I like that frame of reference, because you're saying, well, a man physically, is just an adult boy. You've grown physically mature, but the problem is, a lot of times men, or you're still mentally in your boyhood. You know what I mean? So playing games, not really taking life serious, playing with women's hearts, not taking responsibility for yourself. Your priorities are off and things of that nature. So I can see that point of view. I've had that point of view before as well. Before TikTok, oh my gosh, because in having these types of conversations, what I found is, a lot of times, instead of men taking responsibility for the way they negatively impact women and children and themselves, they'd rather divorce whole groups of men and say, oh, well, that's not a man, that's a boy, right? And in that context, the definition I've adopted is, a man is, an adult male. You know what I mean? Period. Once you get to a certain age of, you are a man. But what quality of man are you, right? And that, because I want to deal with, I don't want men to start to just separate each other. Oh, that's a boy. That's a man. Even though in a certain reference that is true. Probably in a room of only men, we would have that conversation. But in a room of men and women, where men are being called to take accountability for their actions as a group, I would say that a man is an adult male, like a boy is a non-adult male. And then when you get into the quality of man, it's about your choices. Because at a certain point, you're choosing not to be responsible for yourself. You're choosing to instead leech off of the resources of other people, in order to sustain yourself, right? And you could be 40 years old, 50 years old, and still doing that. And I'm not going to call you a boy at that point. You know what I mean? I think it would be insane to call you a boy, but I
Yeah,
would call
absolutely.
you, I would call you an immature man, a childish man.
Right, right.
You know what I mean? I didn't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, no, 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 no. I completely agree. I think in certain aspects, there's in certain aspects of life, we have to mature to a certain level and we have to grow up to a certain level in order to be able to accomplish certain things and be productive in certain aspects of life. But when it comes to an adult male, there is no excusing his behavior, regardless of, why he feels like he had to do it. You are responsible as an individual for what you do and why you do it, or how, the impact that it makes on people.
Absolutely. One person asked, "Can y'all talk about how patriarchy harmed your boyhood?"
Oh God.
Patriarchy harmed your boyhood.
So
Um,
for a lot of boys, this is something that I experienced. You're not you're immediately being conditioned for manhood. And the problem with that is culturally and socially, we don't see manhood as anything really, we don't see it for the complex nature of life that it is. We just see it as you're supposed to be strong, you're supposed to be a provider, you're supposed to be a protector. And we immediately start instilling these things in ourselves as boys. And a lot of times the way that we do this is ignoring our young boys' emotions, or telling them not to express their emotions, or not to have their emotions, or not to express themselves in a certain way, or not to dress a certain way, or not to be too soft and compassionate, as that may lead to you being a weaker or a meeker male once you reach adulthood.
no, I agree, and I think for me personally, um, it's a bus driver actually shared this with me. He said there's a trick. There's a trick that's played on the younger generation, and he didn't say of men, but I'll add there's a trick that's played on the younger generation of men, and that trick is patriarchy will lead you away from yourself. So as a boy, I'm trying to grow up and find my way as a man, and all the men in my life are pointing this way. Hey, you got to go this way. You got to. This is the
Right.
way. This is the way to manhood. This is how you get. This is how you get the good life. You know what I mean? And as I grow older, right, and I start to do these things to become a man, I actually find at some point that I was going the wrong way. You know what I mean? That as far as when I talk about the wrong way, as far as finding my purpose, as far as living, as my authentic self, as far as being healthy, all of these things, I was going to, one of the rites of passage of manhood, at least, where I'm from, was your first beer, right? And so, the OG, when he felt you were older and old enough, he'd give you a sip and say, here, try this. You know what I mean? And that was like a head nod to your maturity. Like, oh yeah, you're ready for this. You know what I mean? It might be the first time you took a smoke. It might be when you lose your virginity.
This
It
is
might,
something. So I've grew up in a lot of different places. I've grew up in a lot of different environments, and I've experienced a lot of, mostly here, well, all here in America, but I've
yeah,
experienced a lot of different cultures and how a lot of different people were brought up. And for some people, it's, your first beer. For some people, it's the first time you have intercourse. For some people, it's the first time you take the life of another living being.
right.
So a lot of times our introduction into manhood is really desensitizing us to something that we are not emotionally prepared for.
That's true. And think about it. Like let's say I would have become an alcoholic. The man that gave me my first drink of beer started me on that road to alcoholism. You know what I mean? The man that gave me my first smoke started me on my road to being a drug addict. The man that like said, "Hey, let's take this." You know what I mean? Or the older, it was like an older cousin or something like that. Well, started you on your way to becoming a criminal. But these are the ways we establish, like we said earlier in the conversation, when there's a gap in your masculinity as far as how society defines it, because we're not wealthy, because we don't have a lot of resources. These are the way we fill in those gaps.
Right.
And a lot of times those gaps is that toxicity because it leads to unfavorable outcomes in your life and those that are around you. You know what I mean? How does that build up the community when every boy is trying to define their way as a man through violence?
And that's the dangers of conforming to anything.
Yeah.
If you're like a part of a fan base, for example, and that fan base, like the Beehive, if that fan base is perceived a certain way, and within that fan base, there's a culture that enables and promotes that type of behavior or that type of lifestyle, whatever the perception of that fan base is, then the people within that fan base, it quickly becomes a cult. Everyone becomes forced to conform. I may be a fan of this person, you may be a fan of this person, but we can express our fandom in different ways, or at least we should be able to. But oftentimes these cultures and these groups, the perception of the groups is defined by people outside of the groups, and that then becomes it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in some ways. Oh God, not the barbs. I intentionally avoided that one.
We got a follow-up question to that. What do you feel might have saved your boyhood from patriarchy's grip? You know, ultimately, I think it's a communal thing, right? When you live in a healthy community, that community has values that are self-sustaining. As you live up to those values, it builds up that community and it becomes stronger and stronger with every generation because all the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding is being passed down to this next generation. And now they're also combining that with their own experiences in an idyllic way, right? When you're in a destructive community, the values of that community, and again, this is an in-house conversation, right? So let me preface this by saying, if from a racial standpoint, if you're on the outside looking in and you're contributing to the demise of said community, this is a critique you don't have the opportunity to give because you're the one that actually created
Right.
this scenario, right? So if you're a part of the people group that's contributing to the redlining that created the ghetto and contributed to all of that, then
Right.
you
Your
don't.
criticism doesn't come before accountability.
Right. But you know, if the values of that community, by virtue of circumstances, maybe in their control or out of control, says that the more self-destructive you are, the more you're seen as a man, then that's going to create more self-destruction. You know what I mean? So, what would have saved me from that well, really, if there was no patriarchy, honestly, because patriarchy is a male-dominated society. So to say, is there a way to spin patriarchy differently so that that doesn't happen? No, there's not a way to dominate someone in a healthy way. Unless it's safe and consensual or something like that.
Yeah, safe word.
Right.
But
But
yeah, I don't think like I said, I grew up in a lot of different places, so I've seen how a lot of different people were brought up, and not just different, geographical locations, but like different financial classes. I've been middle class, I've been lower class. I've seen how these different people interact, and a lot of times wealth will alleviate a lot of problems that people endure, but a lot of the problems that exist within these underserved and underprivileged communities, that stuff is rolling from downhill. Like, it's not starting in these communities. It's starting in the communities that we oftentimes perceive as, more privileged or better off. But a lot of times they have more access to resources, but they're dealing with the same culture. They're dealing with the same behaviors. And it becomes way easier for a woman to submit to a man. I can't speak from a woman's experience, but I know from the experiences of what I saw, it's a lot easier for a woman to submit to a wealthy man than for a woman to submit to a man who is faced with the same struggles of survival as she is.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that she's happy.
Exactly. They are miserable.
Because you can be rich and miserable, and you can be rich and be in a dangerous situation. Because the more wealth and resources that person has, they can use those wealth and resources against you as well and get away with it. So we talked. Actually, this kind of came up naturally in the conversation, but just to continue on with that, like, what are the contributing causes of male violence, and what what role does a person's definition of manhood play in conflict resolution?
So if I perceive my masculinity, if I perceive my manhood as my ability to be a protector, as my ability to be a provider, a large part of that is going to come from my ability to control my environment. A large part of my ability to control my environment, it depends on what I'm capable of mentally and physically. And it's very easy. It doesn't take much for someone to be capable of physical destruction. It doesn't take much for someone to be capable of physical force. It takes repetition. It takes practice. It takes discipline. It takes awareness for you to be mentally capable of overcoming certain obstacles. So when it's much easier for me to overcome an obstacle by destroying it, and this is not productive in the long term for myself and those around me, but I live in a culture and a society that enables me to do these things, it becomes much easier for me to do them habitually, to do them without a second thought. So now, as a kid, when I'm seeing all of these examples of violence, when I'm seeing all of these examples of destruction being glorified and being praised, and people are being paid billions for it, and they're getting all of the things in life that I want when I become a man, this is the type of man that I'm going to want to be. So now I'm very comfortable with violence. And not only am I comfortable with violence, but I have been exercising and practicing and engaging in constant repetitions of things that are somewhat violent in nature so that I can become better and more capable of violence, even though this is not the most productive way for me to acquire the things that I want. I'm enabled by a patriarchal society that says it's more acceptable for me to be violent than it is for me to be emotional or to express emotions without violence.
In fact, it was a question was asked in the comments. So patriarchy is the problem, and I think that because patriarchy's been around longer than racism, but much longer, and so much longer so that I think we've accepted that as the only way to live, right? But if you go through the 5-question exercise, right, the 5 whys, and you start to really drill down, okay, why does patriarchy exist? Why is it a thing? You'll find that patriarchy is based on violence. It's based on the threat of violence. When you start asking the question, well, why are men in this patriarchal world assumed to be more superior than women? The answer that you'll get is violence.
It's violence.
Right? So, and then when you talk, even amongst men, when you say, "Oh, I've heard so many quote unquote scholars say that it's this unspoken low level violence that always exists between men, and that's actually what keeps the peace or whatnot." So it's when if you answer that question that way and you say, "Well, are you saying patriarchy is the problem?" Yeah, it is.
I think it's much deeper than that. We can say that, the patriarchy is the problem, but the real problem lies in the things that preserve the patriarchy, right? Because if we all put something to a vote and to figure out who we want to be our world leader, right? And we all vote for a man, and now we exist in a patriarchy, but the man that we votes for, make sure that everyone is subject to equality or whatever, that's not necessarily going to be the same problem that we have now, in which we are not only under the rule and the control of, all of the world leaders are men, or they're either men or women who are willing to conform to the patriarchy, but you don't leave enough space to change the system. You don't give women the freedom and the independence to make a choice. Because if you choose to be a part of this, then that's totally different. If you don't have a choice, you want to resist, you don't want to be a part of this. Now your choice is life and death, and that becomes way different. And that's an oversimplification of the patriarchy, but it's really deeper than just looking at the fact that men are in control or men have this power and influence. Yeah, that's problematic, but the reasons it's problematic is because we're not giving women their independence and their say.
I think the misnomer is that, and again, going because it's been so well ingrained in us that we almost make patriarchy synonymous with men. So when it's said, we need to dismantle patriarchy, some men almost interpret that as we need to dismantle men or dismantle manhood and masculinity altogether. You know what I mean? Oh, when you say toxic masculinity, they see it as an assault against masculinity itself, like masculinity is bad. But patriarchy doesn't say that men can't lead. It's saying that just because patriarchy says because you're a man, you should be a leader, and because you're a woman, you should not be a leader, right? Patriarchy doesn't say, oh, well, if you dismantle patriarchy, it doesn't mean that men can't lead. It means that leaders lead.
Right, right.
Because I've acquired the skill set of leadership through my experience, through my study, through my practice, that I am a qualified leader, and that can be a man or a woman, or someone that's non-binary. But I think a lot of times men feel attacked when we're talking about a system and a way of thinking that is not just harming women, but also harming everyone involved. Right? It's very interesting when we talk about, okay, we need to stop violence, and it's like, why should we stop violence? And I need to be the conqueror, and it's almost like you have a privilege as a man, and you don't want to surrender that privilege because you feel bound to it in some way. You know what I mean? It's like
It's a certain level of entitlement, and
yeah,
it also goes back to what we were saying about this fear of acknowledging failure, because this leads to us having an estranged relationship with accountability. And
mhm,
when we're not able to take accountability for our actions, our behaviors, and the impact that we have, it's easier for us to blame others for when things go wrong and then take credit when things go right.
absolutely. And just to continue with the discussion of accountability, a question was asked: what privilege do black men have? I would say black men still have male privilege, and maybe it's a diluted form of male privilege because of the racism that we acquire by virtue of being black. But you still have male privilege, and if you don't think you have male privilege, I would challenge you to open up any Bible or any Western religious book. You'll be able to find a male God, right, who created everything, who created woman to serve and be a helpmeet for man. And just imagine if that was reversed, what that society would look like, or how you would view yourself, even if you believed in a religion that said that you were created to help someone else, that you were created to serve someone else, that you were
Right.
created to obey someone else, right?
You are
But we take
simply
it
an extension of that person.
right, exactly. Um, I would challenge you to open up any dictionary, and you'll see an entire language in the form of the English language that's slanted towards men in the very way we communicate, and divide what is masculine and what is feminine in the language. There are certain roles that are masculine, and there are certain roles that are feminine. So even the way we think is tainted by kind of this male privilege. You know what I mean? Even the laws that are written, like right now, Roe v. Wade was overturned. I think it was 2 years ago now. Um, you you don't have to think about the implications of what that means, right? Because you're, as a man, there is no law governing your sexual reproduction organs. There's no law, and probably will never be as long as we're in a patriarchal society. But the debate about what happens to a woman's body is taking place a lot of times without women even being able to contribute to that conversation. These are things that we take for granted, and the very nature of privilege, unfortunately, is that a lot of times you don't see it. It's the things you don't have to notice, the things you don't have to be aware of, that comprises your male privilege. And we think that male privilege is something that's being given to you as some like extra benefit. And a lot of times it's just the things that you don't have to deal with, in addition to just being a human being in an imperialistic culture.
I don't know the intentions behind that question. I don't know the person that asked that question, but the
Right.
question itself, what privileges do we have as black men, is really disingenuous, because you could list off a bunch of privileges. You could list off a bunch of privileges, but associating race and gender as if one somehow cancels out the other. And that's not what's happening. When in regards to gender and how we interact with gender, anybody of any race is still going to be subject to sexism or misogyny or misogynoir. Black women have a special type of misogyny that they have to endure. And it's disgusting. But the idea that because even though we're men, we're black men, and that negates any privileges that we may be able to experience is just wild. That's not the case at all. We may be able-bodied black men. We may be rich black men. We may be Christian black men. There are so many different privileges that you could list off, and associating one class with another or one category with another in order to challenge, the experiences and the oppression of another group is incredibly disingenuous, and it just doesn't lead to a productive conversation.
Yeah, the original question was, what are the contributing causes of male violence? And I believe we're still very much on topic, because we're talking about racism, we're talking about poverty, we're talking about the influences that affect our lives, and specifically with black men. And you're dealing with a situation where we are experiencing a form of oppression. And I think a lot of times when you're experiencing that form of oppression, you can become very, very laser focused on that and not see how there's still some things you don't have to deal with. I can walk out of my house right now, regardless of where my house is in America. I don't have to worry about stepping on a landmine. Just not something I have to worry about. If I was not American and I was in a different country, that might be something I had to worry about depending on where I am. That's a form of
Walking
privilege.
out of your house in itself is a privilege.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Walking is a privilege, right?
Ownership
Because
is
I
a
have legs.
privilege.
Not everyone has legs. That's a
Housing
form of
is a privilege.
Right.
It should be a right. It should be, I want to make that very clear. Housing, it should be a right afforded to everyone. Unfortunately, that's not the case.
Sorry. I if you don't feel this discussion is at the level that you need to be consuming it, please step out. I don't really have time to have my live band or whatnot. So, yeah, some people may get blocked from the conversation. If it's not for you, it's not for you. But yeah, we're going to keep having the conversation regardless of your opinion. Um, no, you bring up a very good point. As far as just the nature of privilege in itself. You know what I mean? I've heard the same thing come from um, white people that don't have economic power,
Mhm.
quote unquote poor white people. They'll say, "Well, what type of privilege do I have?
And
I'm
they'll
trying to find a
dismiss
meal."
racism and
Yeah,
recategorize it as classism.
right, exactly. It's like, well, what type of privilege do I have? I'm just trying to find my next meal. It's not about what you have. It's about the things that you don't have to deal with. You don't have to step outside of your door and deal with racism. You don't have to deal with racial oppression. That doesn't mean that you're living a privileged life. It just means you have a form of privilege. There's a difference.
Yeah, there's a certain level of there's this self-centered narcissism when it comes to intersectionality and the power dynamic between the privileged and the oppressed, or the privileged and the marginalized. It's like you dismiss the struggles of others while hyper focusing on whatever your struggles and your issues may be, minor or significant as they may be.
Big facts. What needs, I guess, in all of this, what needs to change about the way, especially like specifically cishet men, um, need to see and interact with women with regards to their pursuit of sex and intimacy?
So the first thing, understanding consent. understanding consent, a lot of people don't have a solid understanding of consent. If you're doing anything that challenges someone's choice, then you're violating their consent. So you have to be able to understand, recognize, and respect someone's boundaries and give them a space to set and establish those boundaries with you. If you're denying them that, you're denying them their consent. And whether you get what you're looking for in the moment or not, in the long term, it's going to be costly for you. It's going to be unproductive for you. But when we as men ditch this sense of entitlement that we oftentimes have, because if I'm doing the work to be a good man, I expect to get what I expect to get, and I'm not getting it. So what's happening? I'm going to put in more work, and we're hyper focusing on trying to earn something that really should be a shared experience.
Right.
A lot of times we see sex as something we do to women as opposed to something we do with women. And if we're having that shared experience, if we're both mutually interested and desire that experience, then we're not going to have to put in a certain amount of work or an unnecessary amount of effort, because now we're not doing the things that she didn't request, or the things that she doesn't want, or the things that doesn't contribute to her comfort or my comfort or whoever, your partner may be. You're doing things that society said, hey, this is what you're supposed to do to get what you want. And when you do those things and don't get what you want, you feel this sense of entitlement. But once we stop pursuing it, really, it becomes, this is what happened for me in my personal experience. The less attention I put on pursuing having intercourse, the more access I had to it. Women felt more comfortable around me. Women felt like they could be themselves around me. Women felt like I was going to respect their boundaries. They felt like they were safe around me. So now the things that would lead to me getting a no or lead to me getting a rejection, those things are no longer there, because I did the work to look within myself and see how I may not have given women the space to say, hey, these are my boundaries and you have to respect them. And if I'm not giving you the space to establish a boundary, then I'm not giving you the space to engage or interact with me in an activity that boundaries are important. So that's going to lead to a lot more rejections. And a lot of us don't realize that. So we end up putting more effort into pursuing something that we really shouldn't have to pursue. It becomes almost predatory when you're trying so hard to pursue something.
That part, you took the words right out of my mouth. It's taking away the predator prey dynamic, and making it more collaborative. And as I was thinking about the question, we should, because the way I phrased it was sex and intimacy, but we should reverse that and it'd be intimacy and sex. Because if you're looking for intimacy, your priorities are going to be very different than if you're just pursuing sex. If you're just pursuing sex,
that is a great point, and that goes back to something we were discussing earlier about how the patriarchy affects us in our boyhood. So when we're boys, as babies, we may receive a lot of attention and intimacy, but that quickly gets taken away from us because we have to be our parents, or the society, the community that we grow up in. They began preparing us for adulthood. They began preparing us for manhood, and you're immediately denied intimacy. You're immediately denied a certain amount of attention, and you then grow up without that, and you associate intimacy with sex. You associate romance with sex, because that's the only time as a man you can relate that experience to anything. You can't relate that experience to anything when it comes to your friendships. You can't relate that experience to anything when it comes to your childhood or your upbringing, because the last time you received a healthy, unrestricted amount of intimacy, you was too young to remember.
Facts. Real quick, a quick commercial. Let's get the likes up to 15,000 or 20,000 if we could, just to keep the live going. There's As Malcolm X says, with the room this big, we would be remiss to think that there weren't just a few enemies in the crowd. And whenever I get that little catch, thing that's trying to get me to authenticate that I'm a human being, when clearly I'm human because I'm talking, that means that someone's trying to get the live banned or whatnot. So let's get the likes up. Please share the live as well. Let's get up to 100 people in this live and keep going. But yeah, absolutely want to keep this conversation going. No, you hit the nail on the head with intimacy. I think in the same token, what needs to change about the way men think about and pursue work with regards to their desire to be providers and protectors for the people that they love?
So when it comes to being a provider and a protector, you have to accept that you're doing this for others. You're doing this for your community. So when you accept that, you become more accepting of certain roles and positions that may not be fulfilling to you individually. But it is not okay for you as a provider or a protector to develop some level of resentment and then take that out on those that you are supposed to be providing and protecting for. Because that is your responsibility. You have accepted that position, and it is your responsibility to do so without exploiting or abusing those that you are doing it for, because now you are no longer a benefit to your community. You are another threat to your community. And people are very dynamic, so I don't want to oversimplify anything and say that, one person is all bad or this one activity makes you all bad. But what it takes for you to be a provider, if that is abuse, then you're not a qualified provider. But if we as men see ourselves as recognize that we are men and we belong to this social group that is largely problematic, but we are also individuals. And if we live for ourselves in a sense, and we pursue careers for ourselves, and it may not be the most highest paying job, or it may not be a high paying industry, or it may be something that we may not be great at, but if it's something that we love, is something that we enjoy doing, then we're not going to have a problem putting in the necessary repetitions and the necessary practice to become great at it, to become better at it. And that would allow us to find ourselves in more positions where we are qualified to be leaders, because I've spent so much time doing this thing that I really love doing. I have the experience, I have the skill set, I have the knowledge. I am a qualified leader because I've done what I'm good at. I exist in a role that I fit in, as opposed to trying to conform to a role where I don't fit. And now I'm holding a space where somebody else might better fit this position, and I'm costing my community by occupying this role.
It's true. I like you talked about your passion. When I think about the way work is going in general, right? With so much automation, and I think about what's going to be the differentiator, right? The differentiator is going to have to be your passion, right? Are you doing something that you're so passionate about that other people connect with that passion? That it's uniquely your position because no one else can do it but you, because no one else feels about it the way you feel about it, right? Um, so then it requires us to think outside of what a job is, right? The job is it's just kind of a placeholder. If your job is just a placeholder for you pursuing your dreams, you not only will you is it in your best interest to rethink that career path, but it may become mandatory. You know what I mean? Because if you're performing in that job like a robot because you're not emotionally connected to it, it's not something you're passionate about, what would stop a robot from taking your job?
Absolutely.
It, and I would hope that, the way artificial intelligence evolves, that it would allow more people to pursue their passions and pursue and the quality of life becomes better that way. But with regards to gender dynamics, it's what you are not your job. If you reduce yourself to a wallet or reduce yourself to a bank account, you're making yourself less than human in that regards as you're dehumanizing other people. So being able to connect with, okay, what does it mean to be a provider? Is it mean to just provide income, or are you providing stability? Are you providing security? And what do those things mean? You know, if you're emotionally unstable, or if you're mentally always, awry when you come home, all of those things are important. So the way we define what a protector is and what a provider is needs to change beyond just these tangible resources, because it's not just your tangible resources that are keeping people alive. It's who you are. It's your personality. It's your energy. It's your concern for others. All of those things go into building people up around you, as opposed to tearing them down. I think it's a paradox to be able to consider yourself a provider and a protector, while at the same time tearing down the people that you consider yourself providing and protecting for.
Yeah, there's a certain level of cognitive dissonance that a lot of us have to carry with us in order to identify with certain things in society, in order to perform in certain functions in society. A lot of men will convince themselves that they are providers and protectors, but you have no family, you have no community, you're not a provider, you're not a protector. At best, you're a survivor. At best, you're getting the resources you need to continue surviving, but you're not providing for anyone, you're not protecting anyone. And if your provisions and protection comes along with control, you're, again, not a provider or protector, you're just controlling people and, in a sense, imprisoning people. So you're not really providing for anyone, you're controlling.
Big facts.
But you have to have a certain level of cognitive dissonance to be able to identify yourself as a provider, as a protector, as a leader, when no one chose your protection, no one chose your leadership, no one chose your provisions.
That's big facts. Um, Kind of along as a overarching umbrella to this conversation, right? What are your thoughts on men who support and practice feminist ideas?
I think it's very important for when it comes to feminism. It's really a mindset. It's not it's something that we as men should be committed to, in a sense that we have to recognize how we interact with gender, how we interact with people whose gender is different from ours, people whose gender is the same as ours, and we have to take accountability and responsibility for how we interact with these people. And when it comes to feminism, I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that we're not we're not the victims, we're not the targets, we're not the subjects of the patriarchy. So it is never acceptable for us to center ourselves in any aspect of society when it comes to gender, unless we're centering ourselves on the table of accountability.
I love that. I'm gonna credit you every time I say that, but I'm gonna keep that.
You can have it, bro.
Consider yourself on the table of accountability. I think there's a couple things at play. One, I think there's a standard that if you're going to be a man that tries to practice and embody feminist ideas, that you have to hold yourself to, because you're going to be in, especially if you're like a content creator, or you're someone that is not just like practicing these ideas like in your own life, but are being vocal about it. And by the way, I do think men need to be vocal about it. So regardless of what level of education you're at, you know what I mean? 'Cause someone said earlier, it was like, oh, I don't think you have the qualifications to have this conversation. Like, I vehemently disagree. I think, boys in the 8th grade need to be having this conversation. I think this conversation needs to happen on all levels, you know what I mean? From the barbershop to the collegiate classroom, because it's that big of an issue. So if you say that, well, this conversation should only be sequestered to those who are in academia, this just may not be the life for you. You know what I mean? And I think the common man, so to speak, and I consider myself a common man, needs to be able to have this conversation. But if you're going to have this conversation as a man,
It's most important because
yeah,
people who don't have, when it comes to college degrees and secondary education, a lot of people don't have access. And the people who don't have access oftentimes are subjected to the harshest levels of sexism. They're subjected to the harshness of racism and classism. It's the worst in these sections, in these areas of society. And that's where it's most important that we stand up, we speak up, and we set better examples. And I think when it comes to young men having these conversations, the best thing that we can do beyond being better ourselves as individuals, we need to be able to set an example for these young men to know that it's okay to be wrong. It's okay that to admit that you were wrong. Because a lot of times when these conversations are being had, if you're afraid to admit that you're wrong and you're on the wrong side of the conversation, you're going to double down and you're going to overly commit to things that are incredibly problematic. But when you have the willingness and the ability to recognize that, okay, look, I may not always be right, but I know my heart is in the right place. So let's have a conversation. Let's have a genuine, authentic conversation about how we can better interact with each other and how we can have a more productive, existence together.
Yeah, and listening to women. Listening to women is important because that is one of the methods in which you're able to move yourself away from the center. And then because it would be the same as if a white tea person came into a black conversation about racism and just centered themselves. You know what I mean? Just and made it about them. It's the what do they call it? The white fragility.
Yeah. And it's very similar to male fragility. Very similar. Very similar.
So being able to. And I think part of it is just being able to have a conversation with anyone, because we should be able to decenter ourselves all the time, because we all have varying degrees of experiences, and you should come into a conversation wanting to learn something, not just wanting to be heard, right? But especially in this type of dynamic, it's important to be able to listen to women and know how to take the spotlight off of you and refer to someone else. You know what I mean? Like Kay Shep is one of the creators that's in my live right now. Follow Kay Shep. Kay Shep is talking about this all the time. And I think sometimes when women are talking about it, unfortunately, men seem to shut out. I've heard it so many times saying, well, you need to hear it from a man because men only hear men. I think that's so foolish, because women articulate it way better because they're the ones that go through it.
It's their experience. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Best I can do is give another man a secondhand account.
Yeah. I don't know how you feel about it. Like, I've gone back and forth with calling myself a feminist or calling myself a womanist. At the end of the day, where I landed was, I don't care about the label, so to speak, as more as what work I do on a day-to-day basis. It's almost like being called an ally, you know what I mean, or advocate. It's like, that's not a title for me to even take on. If another person hears me speak and says, "Oh, that's an ally," okay, great, fine. You know what I mean? I just want to continue doing the work, and then let people call me whatever they want to call me. Whether you want to call me a simp, you want to call me an ally, you want to call me a feminist, I don't care, as long as the work is getting done. But if I had to call me something, I would say I'm an anti-misogynist or a philogynist, meaning I'm against misogyny and I'm for women.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I don't wear the labels necessarily, but when it comes to these labels, it's more so like, it's not what they call you, it's what you answer to. And right. When it comes to feminists, that's something I'm willing to answer to, but it's not something that I'm going to label myself. It's the same thing like being a leader. I'm not going to label myself a leader. If someone is willing to follow, they see leadership qualities that I have. And if they call me a leader, I'll answer to it. But if you don't feel like I'm a leader, I'm not going to assert that. If my actions and the way that I carry myself and the way that I interact with you does not give feminist, if it doesn't give leader, then I'm not. If it does, then thank you.
Absolutely. It's spelled with an I, so it's philo, like same thing the way you would spell philosophy, but it's phylogeny. Yeah, absolutely. Because philo is like a lover of. So philo would be, miso, it's like I'm against, I hate, philo, I love, all that Nice Greek stuff. Jupiter says, I agree. Leaders have action and not announcements. Oh,
Absolutely.
oh,
Absolutely.
that was poetry. You get the snaps for that one. That was nice. Um, is there a such thing as feminist manhood? And if so, what does that look like?
I think that goes back to like with the labels. It's not necessarily because we're very complex human beings. So when it comes to feminism, when it comes to being a feminist, is very much a verb. It's about action. So what actions do you have that you can associate with feminism? What actions can you present, or what actions do you commit to that elevates women, that gives women freedom of choice, gives women freedom of expression, or not necessarily gives it to them, but allows them to exercise these rights that we are all born with? Right. So if we're not infringing on their rights, or if you're removing the obstacles that a lot of women and feminine presenting individuals may have to deal with, then you're countering the balance of inequality. Then that action can be perceived as feminist. But the reason, I'm uncomfortable wearing the feminist, or, using the feminist label for myself, is because my perspective, my experience is going to be is really largely irrelevant when it comes to uplifting women, when it comes to giving women the platform. So I need this information from women. I'm not going to give them the information about their experience. I need the information about their experience and what I can do to better that, or what I can do to stop obstructing whatever freedoms that they may be entitled to, or whatever, obstructions that I could be placing in front of their progression.
No, I agree with that. I think there's a certain amount of sensitivity that needs to be maintained depending on the space that you're in. And because I'm aware that there are women that believe that feminism is, or to be a feminist or a womanist, what I mean, is specifically for non-males. And there are some that don't agree. That's why I'm reluctant to just come in a room and identify as a male feminist. Plus, I realize that there are a lot of, not a maybe not a lot. I would say if you go by what's publicly put out there, there's a lot of performance. There's a lot of
Mhm.
performative male
Right,
feminists
right,
that
right,
are out
right.
there. And I feel like if I don't engage in that performance at all, if I don't put on that costume, so to speak,
Right.
then what I do will be attributed to substance, and I can again let other people play my flute or horn or whatever. You know what I mean? If there's call for doing so, but I think if you are going to take on that mantle, whether you take the label or not, you have to be aware that one, you're fallible as a man. It's something that you've been conditioned with, that you've grown up with, and there are going to be times where the internalized patriarchy in you is going to rear its ugly head in small and large ways, and you should prepare for that moment, right? You should prepare by practicing transparency. You should be prepared by practicing accountability, even in the small things, and being able to say, you know what, I was wrong, or I misspoke, and having around you men and women that can give you honest feedback, that can tell you straight from the hip what it was and what it wasn't, and what you did and what you thought you did and what you really didn't accomplish in those particular moments. Getting that type of feedback is invaluable, and being willing to take that feedback and continue to grow, because it's never something that you arrive at. You know what I mean? It's something that
Right.
you continue to practice and get better at. You
Because
know,
the focus of feminism is bettering women's experience, and
right?
being that we are not women, it's going to constantly be our responsibility to receive this information from women as to how we are, going to be able to do this.
Facts. So well said. So well said. So, again, along those lines, like, what would be some examples of, I guess, quote that type of manhood, feminist manhood in popular culture?
So, a couple of examples that I can think of. One would be like Kyrie Irving, for example. I don't know. I know he's a very polarizing individual and a very complex and misunderstood human being. But when it comes to feminism, again, this goes back to actions. One of his more feminist actions was he hired the first black female agent to manage him. So his agent is the only black woman to have negotiated an NBA contract. And to employ women is one thing, but to give women the power to dictate their environment, the power to make a choice, that then becomes more feminist than simply employing a woman to, do labor for you or perform a task for you and take a certain load off. Another example of feminism is Cat Williams. Cat Williams, I feel like, is, again, misunderstood, very controversial. But one of the things that he does is he employs female comedians. He allows them to write their own content. He allows them to express themselves how they want, regardless of how they look or where they come from. He chooses these comedians based off of their talents, based off of their skills, rather than, some type of agenda to advance his own personal career.
No, that's fair. And you know what? I just realized something even as we're having this conversation in the nature of the questions, like the responses that I have to this question are all fictional characters. And it just came to me that the reason why I thought of fictional characters is because I didn't want to connect my name with another man and say that that's the example of feminist manhood. And then next week, something comes out about this man that
That's why I say it's about actions. It's about actions. I'll associate an action with feminism, but a complete whole human being, nah. I used to be a Kanye defender. I'm not putting myself on none of these celebrity names no more. Right. I refuse.
It's crazy. And then, I mean, not just quote unquote celebrity, TikTokers too. It'd be like, you'll at one moment you're like, oh yeah, this is the person to follow because they do this type of content. And the next thing you know, they're like in this scandal. It's like womb
random controversy, and it's like, wow.
I'm like, like people part 1, 2, and 3. I'm like, oh wow, what's going on? Not to call out one creator or the other, but I think it just goes to the nature of our fallibility. You know what I mean? When you see like Tim Wise is somebody I always point to as a white anti-racist that I really like. I really like some of the things that he says. But even then, I'm reluctant because it's like, well, man, what if it comes out like 5 years later, like
Tim Wise some old tweet or something? It's like, oh man, this very thing is happening to LeBron. I saw a video going viral where LeBron was saying something about he was on a live stream with Diddy. He said, "There's no party like a Diddy party." And I was like, well, it's tough when you give people that type of acknowledgement. You shout them out, and now you're associated with, whatever negativity could be attached to that.
Yeah, and that Diddy and R. Kelly, it's because we grow. First of all, music has a bonding effect. So as you listen to music, you bond your memories to that music, right? So that's I'll be watching, like there's so many songs that even though maybe PD was just in the background talking smack, that I really like that music. Same thing with R. Kelly. Like I grew up on R. Kelly, but because of that, we have kind of a halo effect where it's like because of this person's talent in music, we think that this person is a good person. You know what I mean? It's like even if we know for a fact this person is not a good person. Like I thought something was funny when P. Diddy had all of his rappers in shiny suits on stage. Like what? Like I didn't think that was hip hop at all, but it was like, well, but it's P. Diddy and P. Diddy is connected to Biggie, so I guess I guess it's okay, you know what I mean? But I thought something was funny when R. Kelly was on Aaliyah's album cover in the background looking creepy, like, you know what I mean? Well, the fact that he freaking married her, you know what I mean? Like that was weird to me. We knew R. Kelly was dirty like way back then. When age wasn't nothing but a number, but it's like we ignore those things because of what they do for us, right? Because of what they do for us and how they make us feel. And I think if you're going to be a male feminist per se, I use that term loosely, you have to understand that that is also something that's on your shoulders at all times. You know what I mean? There are going to be people that you make them feel a certain way because of what you're doing. And it may not have anything to do with you, but at the same time, there's that responsibility. And I would say that with really any man that wants to do something different. You know what I mean? If you want to do something different than just be a low down, dirty, rotten scoundrel, you have to understand that there is a standard that you have to hold because you're trying to do something positive. And anytime you're trying to do something positive, there's always going to be the undercurrent of, okay, but what's the other side of it? And how can I undercut this movement by undercutting this man or undercutting this woman? Um, so, yeah, the
I think
transparency.
one of the things that I struggle with when it comes to feminism is the realization that as long as the patriarchy exists, as long as misogyny exists, we're all misogynists. We're all patriarchs in this because regardless of how you use this influence that you still have it. Regardless of how you use this weapon that you still have it. You may not weaponize it against someone, but to expect for someone to see you with a weapon that is very threatening to them and automatically assume that you're not going to use it, that's delusional.
Right.
So we have to recognize that we always present a threat. And it's hard to present and represent and be a part of this threat and say, hey, I'm a feminist, you can trust me. I have to show you. I have to give you the actions. I can't have this weapon and just tell you to trust me. I'm not going to use it.
And even then, some women aren't going to trust you, and,
Absolutely. And
and well deserved. You know what I mean?
absolutely.
That's fine.
To be offended by that
Eddie,
is insane.
Eddie be talking. He coined, and I can't explain it a better way. He said, "There's always a cool cup of patriarchy right in front of you as a man, and you can drink from it at any time." And the thing
Anytime.
about it is because we're in a capitalistic society where people are prone to use any advantage they can as a competitive advantage, it's a tendency there. Like, why wouldn't you use it? Oh, you know what I mean? You wouldn't use it if you're good, but when your back is up against the wall and
Right.
it's between you eating and you drinking from this cool cup of patriarchy, you might take a sip. You might take a
Not
sip.
to justify it though. Not to justify it.
No, not
There's
just fine.
no
I'm
excuse
saying like
whatsoever.
there's a cool cup of racism in front of every
Right.
white person in America, and,
Right.
and you might be kind of, and some of the liberals kind of fall victim of this. Like if you're good and life is going well, okay, yeah, I don't know, I'm anti-racist and I believe in Barack Obama, but when your back is up against the wall and it's a choice between you getting that contract and somebody else getting that contract, and your kids getting that next video game console and that next car, and
Mhm.
somebody else getting the car that's a person of color, you might take a little, just a little sip of racism, just a little, you know what I mean, a shot glass of racism. You might
I'm gonna
just,
use this. I'm gonna use this
nobody,
privilege that I've been pretending doesn't exist.
yeah,
Yeah.
right, yeah, yeah, oh yeah, nobody,
Let me see. Let me see what the value of this is for me right now. How
right,
much
right.
can I get out of this?
But the examples I use, I was thinking about the last Airbender, right? The character Aang. And I liked Aang because Aang was curious. And I think a lot of times all of these systems are based on fear, right? You're afraid. Again, you got the cool cup of patriarchy there, and
Hmm.
you're afraid that if you don't drink from that cool cup, you're not going to be able to sustain yourself, or you're not going to be viewed as a man, or you're not, something's going to be taken away from you if you don't continue to drink from this cup, right? So you drink from it. But Aang was always curious. Even, I mean, I guess he was a child, kind of, but he had a childlike curiosity about him that even under the most dire circumstances, he still had that light inside of him. And I think if you're gonna, like, looking at feminist manhood, right, you have to keep that curiosity about you, so that when you are called to account, because you're going to make a mistake, as people do, you're more so curious about how you can be better, as opposed to fearful about how people are going to see you, or what's going to be taken from you because of these consequences, right? Being curious. The other thing I liked about Aang, and it kind of tipped me to an archetype that I need to explore more, is his counsel. Like he had Toph and he had Katara.
Guitar.
Yeah, and both of them, were different aspects of the feminine because Toph was kind of rough and rugged,
Right.
and so you had the different types of being his counselor, not just his counsel, but also his teachers in a way to use his own energies. And you had Sokka. Sokka was the masculine side of it, but Sokka was depowered in a way, right? He was masculine, but he was learning how to use that masculinity in creative ways and become a true warrior versus just leaning into kind of brute force. So there was because of that, Aang had both the masculine and feminine balance within himself, and I think that's similar to what feminist manhood looks like, where you're able to draw from these different energies and find your own version of self-expression on that spectrum of the masculine and feminine, and not leaning to so heavily into just masculine energies. Then I thought about, well, is there a pattern to that? Like I looked at the Matrix, and I love Matrix, but I thought Neo was also an example of feminist manhood, where he definitely had that purpose, but again, he had Morpheus and he had Trinity, and
Hmm.
both of them were advising him. Morpheus, even though he was in the masculine, was the god of dreams, right? So yes, he's masculine, but he's also very much purpose driven. He's not locked into his baser nature. Then I was
And
like,
of
okay,
the
well,
three people that influenced Neo
yeah,
the most, you had Morpheus and you had the Oracle and
right.
Trinity. So you have two feminine female characters who have the most influence over this individual.
Yeah, Mulder is a good choice too. I like Mulder.
Never seen
Uh,
Mulder. But back to your Avatar reference, when what was, I forget the name of it, I'm drawing a blank. The follow-up show,
oh, the Legend of Korra.
The Legend of Korra, yeah, they
Yeah,
went deeper into like, the spirituality and how they use their powers and where their powers come from. And as they're establishing her as the Avatar, as she's, going through her little training montage, they're showing how she's like really clumsy and she has a lot of brute force, and she has this masculine energy that is juxtaposed to Aang's more feminine energy that's more passive and more accepting of his environment. And then you have this female character who is obviously female, and she's struggling with being more submissive and conforming to her environments. She has this more stubborn nature that is more so dictating her environment.
and I think that's a part of the human struggle, right? It's finding the strength in your innate qualities, and then also being able to find the strength in others to balance yourself out.
Balance, respecting the balance between masculine and feminine, however you perceive the two, you have to respect the balance and respect the fact that you're going to have to balance the two within yourself. You're not purely masculine. You're not purely feminine. However you perceive it, you are a complex human being.
Absolutely, and that's I guess the inner feminism, right? You're finding equality within yourself, and then as you try to seek equality in your exterior world. I like. Can you talk a little bit about? And we went into this a little bit with some earlier questions from the comment section, but can you talk about some of the things that you had to heal from, or maybe that you're still healing from as a man, in order to show up as that balanced human being in the world and in your relationships?
Oh man. I could give you a list of things. So a lot of healing. I don't have a lot of traumas that triggered growth or progression as an individual. A lot of my healing comes from my ignorance and shortcomings, and me not achieving the things that I wanted to achieve. So now it's like, how do I get better? How do I do better? So a lot of my healing has really been cleaning up the mess that was made by all of the problematic things that I've internalized. When I was younger, I grew up in a very homophobic environment. I internalized these things. I internalized transphobic ideas. I internalized sexist and racist anti-black ideas, texturism, colorism. I internalized these things, and eventually you're carrying it for so long that you're forced to face the impact of carrying all of this weight. And when I was forced to face the impact of it, I realized that I got a lot of shit to clean up. I got to get rid of a lot of this stuff. So most of my healing has really been unlearning and reprogramming myself and recognizing that it's not okay to, react to my emotions in this way. It's not okay to express sentiments of any type of divisive sentiment that would make people feel less comfortable being themselves around me, because that's not only costing me things that I want, but it's costing everyone I interact with something that they may want.
That's very true.
So really, in itself, it's like I had to learn to love and appreciate myself as a whole human being, as a complex person who has different there are different faces, different moods, different things that I feel and experience. And I had to recognize and respect the fact that I'm not always going to be on one level. And I need to acknowledge and accept, especially when it comes to feelings. You get a lot of information from your feelings and emotions. And when you're neglecting that, you're denying yourself an infinite wealth of information that you're not receiving because you're denying part of yourself.
Self-love is so important. And I think
absolutely. And that's something that I didn't recognize. I didn't recognize that I was lacking. I was so good at manufacturing confidence. I was so good at manufacturing masculinity for myself. It's like when I was younger, I hit all of these weights and I'm constantly working. I'm making money. I got muscles. I got a beard, and I manufacture all of this masculinity for myself. And when I look deep inside and I realize that all of this external stuff don't define me, it doesn't make me who I am, I realized I had so much more work to do. And I was so thankful for that experience, because in going through that, I realized that I'm capable of building more muscle or acquiring more money, or, even the things that I wanted to do before, I'm more capable of doing them now because I have the advantage of recognizing this infinite wealth of information that I get from appreciating and acknowledging my feelings, or appreciating and acknowledging the fact that I have insecurities. I have things that I struggle with.
I think that that's growth. That's growth. Being able to acknowledge what you're feeling in a moment is so important, because the way our society is set up, it's designed to either keep you living in the past or keep you hoping for a future that may never come. And a lot of time, my mother used to say, don't forget to stop and smell the flowers. And there's not a lot of flowers around, where we lived. A lot of people didn't take the time to grow them. There weren't many gardens, so I didn't necessarily understand the reference at the time. It was like, take time to smell the flowers. What are you talking about? But flowers bloom and then they wither, and they're only there for a short season. And those are the moments of your life, when you can appreciate this moment that you're having right now and savor it and experience it in the fullness of your own body. Not thinking about what happened yesterday, not worried about what's going to happen tomorrow. Then you're actually living your life. And I think a lot of times as men, we forget to live our life in the moment. And when we are kind of in the moment, or what we think we're living, it's almost trying to numb those feelings. Like we're trying to distract ourselves from who we are, who we've become, or who we once were, instead of dealing with those issues and then being able to just live your life. Not just moment to moment, but in the moment, knowing that, yes, I have a past, and yes, hopefully I'll have a future, so not being reckless, but enjoying that moment.
Yeah, I think when it comes to appreciating the small things in life, appreciating the experiences and the moments that you have in life, a lot of people struggle with this because they haven't lost anything significant. But when you lose something and you recognize that you didn't appreciate that properly, you didn't show the right amount of appreciation because you didn't realize how finite or how limited that something may be, that triggers in a lot of people who have a certain level of wisdom that triggers a deeper appreciation for everything moving forward. Because I don't know how long I'm going to have this life. I don't know how long I'm going to have this freedom or these privileges that I enjoy and take for granted. But I'm going to appreciate it while I got it.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times we really don't know what to appreciate because we don't know the value it has to us until it's gone.
That's facts. And I guess taking that all the way back to feminism, part of that is being able to appreciate the women in your life, because patriarchy will have you only seeing people through the lens of utility, of what a woman can do for you or how a woman makes you feel, as opposed to seeing her as a human being that's on her own growth arc. The woman in your life right now today, whether that be your mother, your daughter, your wife, your girlfriend, your aunt, that woman today is not going to be the same woman tomorrow or the day after that or next year, because they're growing and evolving as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you better appreciate the woman you have right now in your life today, because that woman's never going to be there again.
That's something else that prevents a lot of us as men from recognizing how our impacts with women, how our interactions with women impact them and our ability to exist with them. Because a lot of us as men, we don't have long-term relationships with women. If it's not our mother, if it's not our sister that we're really close to, we don't have a lot of female friends. We don't have a lot of women that we can go to and just fully appreciate and understand, because we treat them as a utility, because we treat them as something that is supposed to function for us. Then we don't establish real relationships with them, and that denies us the ability to fully appreciate them. And a lot of us don't recognize that we lack a certain level of appreciation and respect that not only affects her ability to be comfortable around us, but it affects our ability to be comfortable. We could have such a better experience with these interactions if we were more appreciative and respectful towards the people we were sharing these interactions with.
No, that brings up a great point, about the friend zone, because the reason why we don't have a lot of authentic long-term relationships with women is because we are not actually interested in a long-term platonic relationship with women. We're just playing the long game and waiting for the right opportunity to turn what was perceived as a platonic relationship into something, into something intimate or something more than that. And we have so many of these different, long-term relationships going on because we're just waiting for that right moment. And because of that, your friend, quote unquote, is never really safe around you, because you're waiting for a moment to catch them in their vulnerability to take that relationship beyond a boundary that they've already set for you. They've already said they're not interested in you, but you're like, oh, I'm just gonna wear them down. Was it Steve Urkel? I'm wearing you down. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's been popularized in TV. It's been popularized in music and in movies, and so we think it's okay to exist like this, to function like this. It's okay for me to present myself as your friend. I'm not doing anything harmful. I'm not doing anything offensive until I do. So it's fine for us to interact with this like this, even though my intentions may not be genuine.
No, absolutely. And there really is no such thing as a friend zone. It is a men who believe they've been friend zoned are two types of men. Which may be the same man. One is the man I just described that's playing the long game, right? The other man is the one that does not have proper boundaries in himself, because he doesn't set boundaries of what he will be for his female friends and what he will be for a girlfriend or a woman that he's actually interested in. So he winds up doing a lot of things that a boyfriend should do or would do in situations where that's not the nature of their relationship. And maybe that means that the nature of friendship should change, because why wouldn't you do so? Because sometimes we just get stingy. Oh, you're not, with women particularly, it's like, oh, and I've seen this with men in families where it's like, because like a brother or a cousin, because that woman is with someone, there's certain things you won't do for that woman because she's got a man. even though
Right,
that's your
right,
family. You're like, oh no,
right.
I'm
Yeah.
not gonna get your man to do that. I'm not fixing your car. I'm not giving you gas money. Get your man for that, right? But if that's your family, why would you put those type of limits? So sometimes it's
That
men not having
reminds.
boundaries, and sometimes it's men having like really stingy limits with anyone that they're not getting not getting something from.
Right. So when you say boundaries, that reminds me of the episode of Martin when Martin got mad because who was it? Was it
Cole and Tommy or somebody
Tommy?
else?
Did Tommy was it Tommy that gave Gina the money?
It's probably Tommy. Cole was
Tommy
always
lent her some money and he was pissed, like, yo, why would you give my woman some money? And why would you take some money from another man? He
yeah.
really felt some type of way about it. It's fictional, but men really have these experiences. Men really have these feelings, these insecurities, and it denies a lot of us progression and comfort and the things that we want in life for no reason. For no reason. It doesn't benefit anybody.
Big facts. That brings up I guess a related question. Like, what is your personal definition of integrity, and how is that type of integrity achieved and maintained?
So integrity, for me, I believe that integrity is having a consistency with your beliefs and your actions. It's easy to believe one thing, but your actions express another, and they have an impact that is opposite to your beliefs. For example, a lot of times as men, we have a problem with women wanting us for our money. We have a problem with women pursuing men for financial gain, and then we go around and call ourselves providers. This is a role that we have given ourselves. So to have integrity as a provider, you should be ecstatic. You should promote, you should praise the women that give you the opportunity to be a provider. Express this part of your identity. Share and rejoice that women accept this part of your identity if you are genuinely a provider with integrity of your beliefs and actions. Give. You have to give in order to be a provider.
Facts. It amazes me that there are some men in this world that are staunch advocates for patriarchy, but very much vehemently against hypergamy. Like not realizing that hypergamy comes from patriarchy. If you create a situation where women have to be dependent on men because they cannot own their own property, can't work their have their own careers, are legislated into obscurity because you're not going to let them get bank loans and things of that nature, and then say, well, they're gold diggers, and that's some type of unfavorable trait. You're creating a situation where women can't win. You're if you're not hypergamous, then you're ostracized yourself. You're not getting the best out of life because you're in a patriarchal society where you're not going to earn as much as a man. And if you are hypergamous, it's like, oh, well, what you're trying to use me, but we've set ourselves up to be that utility.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to not hold ourselves accountable and not take the responsibility of fulfilling these roles that we are so quick to demand. If you demand this position, this role in society, you have to hold yourself accountable and responsible for doing the best job that you can.
Facts. Please go ahead and tap the screen if you will. Make sure you follow. Is it Kahaleel Johnson? Is that how you
Khalil,
pronounce?
two
Khalil.
syllables, Khalil.
Okay, I was like,
I
got it.
wasn't there. I wasn't part of the decision maker process. She showed it to me. I was like, all right, I like it.
That's what's up. That's what's up. Make sure you follow Kahaleel Johnson. Give him a follow if you don't already. I know a lot of my followers also already follow you, but just in case you don't, make sure that you do. Also, make sure that you follow my YouTube as well as my Spotify. The Will to Change Project is a podcast, so once we get this edited, it will be on both YouTube and on Spotify. This is episode 16, so we got a lot of great episodes dismantling patriarchy. Last question for the men who might be listening, who maybe desire to change but don't know how to change. What would you suggest? Where should they start?
This goes back to something you were saying earlier. Self-love. A lot of people don't realize that your ability to receive love is largely limited by your ability to love yourself. And if you're not able to receive love, if your ability to receive love is limited, your ability to give love is limited. And you may not recognize that because you're giving all of the love that you have, but it may not be much because you don't have a true, genuine love for yourself. So if you really want to have better interactions with women, if you really want to have better interactions with the people around you, you need to have better interactions with yourself. You need to love and appreciate yourself. And for a lot of men, that's really hard because that means recognizing the things about yourself that you may not find favorable. You have to accept that that is part of who you are. And if you want to put in the work to change that or to influence that to be different or better or more productive for yourself, it takes recognition of self. It takes discipline and self-love. So long story short, I feel like as men, the most important place for us to start is within ourselves.
Agree. I agree with the comment section. We start listening to women more, and listening to women is kind of an umbrella term, right? So it doesn't just mean like we got to walk up to every woman and listen. It means seeking out feminist media, like reading women authors. The book that this project is named after is written by Bell Hooks, so the Will to Change Project. So you might start with reading Bell Hooks, with reading Angela Davis. With reading authors that are going to help you get a balanced perspective. I would say how you changing the way you consume media, right? There's a lot of movies that I probably would not have been into as much until I started deconstructing the way I thought about things, right? So there's a show on Amazon right now called Power, and it has a scenario where essentially women develop through evolution this this new ability to shoot almost like electricity out of their bodies, and they're learning how to use this electric voltage in different ways. It evolved as a defense mechanism against men who were assaulting them. So there's this whole how this plays out, because they're like quarantining women, but it's a woman-centered show, right? And challenging yourself to watch a show like that, first of all, to just challenge your own thinking, but then also for your enjoyment. I think there are there are plenty of movies that center men, plenty of TV shows that center men, right? And at a certain time, when do you get tired of it?
That's by design.
Explore something different. You know what I mean? So don't just go with the normal shows that you might watch, or media that you might consume, or magazines you might read. Challenge yourself to learn something different. You know what I mean? Then get to know the women that are in your personal life differently. You know what I mean? I think a lot of times there is a face that women will show us. And I had to learn this personally in my marriage, because even though I was not a quote unquote violent man, right? I did have a temper. And I thought controlling my temper meant controlling what I say and controlling what I do. So as long as I'm not cussing you out, I'm not screaming at the top of my lungs, or I'm not physically, harming someone, then that should be good. But what I realized was that because I was angry, I had a charge to myself, and that charge affected everyone around me. They could tell that I was angry, and that anger affected them, because even if I wasn't violent, there was always that threat of violence, right? So, but they wouldn't tell me that because of that, because they didn't want to set me off. So once I learned that about myself through therapy, I would say therapy is another resource. Therapy and actually having conversations and asking for feedback. Then I realized, I need to change the way I do that. Once they knew that they could be comfortable giving me feedback, we had a whole range of conversations that I would never been privy to, because of the person I was versus the person I was trying to become. So there's a source of, I definitely looking inward, because everything starts with you. So I agree with what you said there, because any change that happens in your life is going to be self-motivated, self-propelled, and you're going to have to be accountable to you more than anyone else. No one else is responsible for your change but you. But then, in addition to that, consuming media, reading books that are going to help you to think differently about these topics, and then trying to find a different way to relate to the people around you, not just the women in your life, but also the men in your life. For me, I was a very insular friend, a very activity based friend. Plenty of men that I played basketball with and played video games with in my youth, but when it came to actually dealing with like real life adult problems, I had not cultivated the relationship where I was comfortable enough to go to another man and share real issues I was going with. I kept it superficial because superficial was safe. But it's not safe when those same issues are causing you to, engage in self-destructive behaviors.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
you're losing yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's honestly that's something that I still work on because it's difficult to not only find people that you trust, but it's difficult to establish a culture of sharing experiences that aren't pleasant. It's like when we're spending time together, I want us to have a task, and that task, I want it to be something we enjoy doing. So now we're saving all of the negative experiences and things that you might be able to help me with. I'm saving it for trying to deal with it by myself. And, I'm only sharing the good experiences with others. So, it ends up growing inside of you and it becomes more baggage that you carry or it becomes a handicap that can eventually wear you down and injure you in some way. Not
Absolutely.
necessarily physical.
Yeah, it's not always physical, but then again, there are some men that, commit, they will unalive themselves. That when you talk about hitting that wall, a lot of times sometimes men will hit the wall and that wall is the end. And not just for them, it can be for their whole family, based on the way they hit that wall. And my plea to other men is don't wait until you hit that wall. Don't wait until you need a therapist to go get one. Because sometimes for me, when I finally reached out proactively to get a therapist, it was because my marriage was almost over. You know what I mean? And at that point, it was almost too late. Luckily, we were able to after many years be able to shout out to my wife in the comments. Come out stronger from it. But it almost didn't go that way because I had waited so long to deal with things that I should have dealt with before I got married.
Right.
And I've been married for almost 15 years.
And whether it be a stubbornness or a fear of change, whatever it is, it eventually ends up costing you something. And you don't realize that at first. So when you're doing things that gives you short-term appreciation, you get instant gratification from something, but you may not necessarily realize how doing this constantly is going to impact you in the long term until you have to face the consequences for your action. You have to face some level of accountability because you've created a mess that you can't run from. So yeah, being proactive and looking within and finding out what it is that you need to work on, being self-aware because you're carrying these things with you and you don't realize how damaging it is. You thinking, oh, that was just one little situation, one little fallout I had with so and so. And now you have a habit and this is how you're constantly responding to your emotions and it's creating more damage as you go on. And eventually you're going to have to answer for that.
Absolutely. I want to thank you so much for coming and taking the time to share.
Thank you for
thoughts.
having
It was
me.
a great conversation. Any ways that the people that are listening can support you? Do you have any products, projects that you're working on, or do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I got some stuff that I'm working on, but nothing that I'm ready to share yet. I want to thank you again for having me, man. I really appreciate everything that you do. I appreciate you as a human being. I have so much respect for you, your creativity. I love your poems. I love your video series that you do. I love on Instagram, the animated series. I love everything that you do is gold. You are one of the most underrated content creators I've seen over on the internet. I have so much love and appreciation for you, man. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you, man. You are a light in a dark place. You are a voice in the wilderness. You know what I mean? And I continue to do what you do, man. I know It's not always easy, you know what I mean, because you get criticism sometimes from unexpected sources, you know what I mean, people that you think would support you, you know what I mean, but continue to
Brothers,
do what you
sisters,
do.
people that you feel like is family. It's like, come on, I'm doing this for you.
Yeah, but you definitely are appreciated here, and if I would love to have you back, and we definitely have to collaborate further going forward, man.
Oh, for sure. Thank you for having me, man. Peace and blessings.
Peace and blessings.
Reflection is the mother of the revolution. Revolution is just a sun for the next generation. Generations are just light for the memory, for countless babies born each morning. So where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line in time to even picture a timeline where by definition, a line has a beginning, an ending? No, each morning is just another reason to lose count of a time that never existed. Because while we pretend we walk reality in straight lines, the planet itself spins in cycles, leaving revolution obvious. Dancing circles around a rectangular concept of progress we like to call God, praying salvation white, creating sacred shapes to keep the colors in the corner, and the blacks on the fringes, and the money on the center. Building a pyramid of interest that keeps its inventors walking through life like it's a shadow of death, when it's really just a shadow of death, cast by skyscrapers that keep success held high, like a candle in the sky, reflecting the sunshine, providing just enough false light to keep the peasants and hoodlums scrambling to the breadcrumbs, left to keep the righteous backsliding to the semi-line to hell. And I'm wondering why revolution is a four-letter word, yet the way people profanely spell it, like it's filler, like it's offensive, like it's anything else than just another word, rusting on a shelf of good intentions, like love, love life, life free. This is what they taught me and told me was tangible. A few years after I learned that I was black and what black really means, before I took a pencil in my hand for the first time and tried to sketch America, or at least what I thought it could be. I took my own blank sheet of this country, my own little state of being, my own little city of influence, and I thought that if I could just sketch blackness correctly, if I could just make the color walk in sharp lines and complex shades, if I could just express how beautifully black and white could coexist on paper, all the could haves and would haves and should haves would start to amount to shit, and intentions would accumulate into what I did, and what I have, and what has happened, and what I found was that the world wasn't framed in black and white, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't describe like love, love life, life free, with those means, only two-dimensional streams of pain and history that keep repeating themselves in current events. Because composing a revolution is like trying to draw an ocean that can show which way the water flows. Yeah, the tide is going out, but the waves are still coming in and around and at you, and they're not staying in the shorelines, they're crashing right on top of your neighborhood, and the riptide is dragging children out of their schools, and fathers out of their families, and mothers out of their minds, and you can see them trying to tread water, straining just to stream, with their lungs half-filled, drowning from the very same substance every other person in America is drinking and enjoying at this very same moment right now. Freedom. Or at least, if they thought it would be. And so I traded my pencil in for a paintbrush and left revolution for things like truth and meaning and understanding and cooperation, things that could make freedom more safe. And I thought that if I could just color my canvas in such a way that it explained diversity vivid and depicted democracy real, even pictured peace profitable, that the people, all the people they would look, all the people they would listen, and the people they would live, and stop killing each other over colors and shapes and sizes and dimensions, like love, love life, life free, like me, capturing every color that I see in the aerosol can trapped behind my teeth, trying to spray paint dreams faster than wind can take them from me, watching as they vaporize before my very eyes, before they barely leave my lips, before the wall can ever wear my thoughts or receive my gifts, because America does not exist. It isn't real. This new world has always been here and yet never tangible. Told like those fairy tales my teacher told me a few years before I learned I was black. What black really means. Like love, love life, life free. Like this country with no lines, in the hand of a president that doesn't know how to draw, scribbling a sketchbook so soaked in blood, the pages disintegrating every time pen meets paper. So they bleached it on the fights that was originally woven white anyway, and let borders die until the colors went off the corners, put in concentration camps. And the blacks went off the fringes, placed in penitentiaries. And the money, oh no, let's not forget about the money. It's put back in the center, and everything is right wing, no matter left or the left extreme, or whatever. As long as it flies and blends to a sky so covered in clouds, population can't see the ground. They just walk on faith and pray to a God that lives in a box and can't define his own face or her own sex or its own shape. Like love, love life, life free, free like America, bombing poverty with food, free to choose who eats and who dies, free to define what freedom is, and stable to the eyelids of little kids who never learned that sleeping in intelligence is far worse than walking in ignorance. So they walk freely off a cliff, sleep freely off a cliff, knowing full well where it is. They just don't care. They just don't care because they see what I see.
Much to say between the moments of our games and repartee. There's never much to read between the lines feelings of what we need and what we'll take. There's never much to talk about or say aloud, but say it anyway.
They woke up each morning to look in the mirror and see a dream lying behind its teeth, smiling like it wants to see something happy or funny or inspiring, but instead it just stares and grins and stays silent because it's not really there. It's just a lie passed down from parent to parent, like the Easter Bunny or Santa Claus, or something to keep little kids moving along through the grades, anxiously waiting the present like it'd be anything more than a toy. That's why I play games with my time and look surprised when it's so broken. When the minutes are bleeding out of its beady eyes, when the months are sticking together like fur, coated with what used to taste like candy, but now just resembles the cavity that torments my waning smile. And I'm old and I'm gray inside, with black and white so smeared on my soul and psyche, it became my religion, breaking the body of my sanity until truth and lie became the last of the relatives of my family. So I traded in my paintbrush for a son, and I thought to myself, if I could just teach this one baby that God has blessed me with to like love, to search for it as if it were a lost brother or sister, to want as if it were the first teddy bear I placed in his crib, if I could just raise this one child to love life, to admire and cherish it, as if it were the finest art, to treat it as like it was priceless, and collect every piece of it, to learn the forgotten craft of creating life. Life would be free. My life. All life would be free. It would be free through my son, and it would be free through my reflection. And that's when I realized